Welcome to the EdTech Unpacked podcast, where we inspire and equip educators to create meaningful learning experiences, highlighting a thoughtful approach to the integration of technology as we teach and transform the lives of our students. I'm Desmond Suarez.
And I'm Aaron Long, and we are passionate about helping educators learn how to better use technology to engage their students. Today, we're going to talk about why you should ditch the differentiation of your instruction. But before you stop this video, we think you'll find the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, even more powerful. So hey, Desmond, before we jump into our topic for the day, let's hit our get to know you question. And so today I'd like to just ask you this question. Can you share a time that you have experienced really frustrating design that got in your way?
Dude, there's so many. And these are the things that we were talking before the show. You notice them and you get really frustrated about them, but then you're asked like this and we forget. But the one that I think we've all encountered, but maybe just blamed ourselves, which is probably often the problem with bad design, right? Is something that they term the Norman doors. And that's not a brand. I think that was the guy that coined the term. But have you ever gone to a door and and it has a handle to open, but it's a push door? Don't blame yourself. It's bad design. And you like fumble all over it and stuff. It's pretty bad.
So what's the reason for the handle? I guess now I'm like picturing this and I'm thinking, why would they ever do that? You bring up a really good point. Bad design.
I think bad design is often not thought through. Someone's like, there's a door that needs to be a handle. And then they don't take the time to figure out what direction it's going.
Which way the door's going. Yeah. All right, hey, a great example. Mine's maybe not quite as strong here, but I'll mention the lighting app I use here in the studio. And just today, I was launching this, and I thought, man, that's so frustrating. I go in to control a light. Okay, you can see I'm controlling my light over here to my right. And when I switch devices to control a different light, it readjusts the order of the lights. And so when I go to click on what I think was the other light, I'm controlling the same light. So it's not a static menu. It's like a dynamically changing menu. And I thought, why would they ever design it that way? It serves no functional purpose and only confuses the user. So not quite as good as a Norman door, but that was a real-time example. So,
well, I think I see designs like that, and my first thought is this app was designed by someone who is not going to be controlling lights. Like they don't understand what it's actually like. That. They prioritize it by recency, and it messes you up every time.
And I would note these are not like the highest end type of light. Okay, so to your point, somebody got paid for the programming here, but wasn't the user.
There you go. And today we are talking about design, but for your classroom, if you're a teacher, you're a designer. And for at least Aaron and I, we both got our master's in basically instructional design. And design is one of my favorite parts about teaching. And unfortunately, as a teacher, you stay so busy so much of the time. I don't get to do as much design as I would like to. It's just not practical to spend as much time. But today, we're going to talk about why you should stop differentiating your instruction. I feel like I'm going to be arrested as a teacher if I say that.
I've already said it, so you're joining the list of arrestees.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it clear of why we're saying that. And we're not just saying, I feel guilty for saying it because it makes it sound like I don't care about all of my different kinds of learners, all of my different students. And that is absolutely not true. In fact, the reason I don't like the idea of differentiated instruction is because I do care about my different students. And I don't feel like typical differentiated instruction matches and gives them what they need. Now, I want to clarify a few things. Differentiated instruction means a lot of things. And kind of if we want to admit it, what we're showing today is kind of a form of differentiated instruction. But it is not usually the way it's talked about. I know for me, I don't know if you've experienced this, Aaron, but I remember sitting through a multi-day differentiated instruction training and the whole time realizing how impractical it was. And not only impractical, but I didn't feel like it was, even if I was Superman, I could do it, I couldn't serve my students. It wouldn't serve them properly.
Well, I think we've all been there, Desmond. If you've been in the education arena more than a couple of years, you've sat through those. And again, I agree with you. I love the premise of it. You're recognizing that all learners have different abilities, different uniquenesses, and they learn in different ways. And so you're really acknowledging that both of these models do that. So that's where Desmond's headed with this, I'm guessing, right? So he's going to surprise me. He's actually the one that's kind of a little bit more educated on this topic, and I'm trying to get up to speed and catch up to him. So I'm along for the ride today, but yeah, I've been there, and I think what you said there about if you could be Superman and do it, that's the feeling I've had. Is it's felt just unrealistic expectations are set in the world of differentiated instruction. Because it's not about could you do it. You could, but can you sustain it? And can it become your every class experience? That's the part I get a feeling of, being overwhelmed when I think, man, what would my life look like if that was my goal, to fully differentiate every lesson? And that feels overwhelming. So that's my takeaway on it.
And let me define what I mean in this case. The part we're against is that I have sat through seminars where they've told us that you need to make sure that you have every activity, every lesson adapted for every student, and every student can get the exact, thing they need for their learning style or their preference or their ability. Some of it frustrates me because there is an aspect of it that is based off of poor reading of science. That the science had shown that there are learning preferences where people prefer to learn in different ways, but there's not a learning style, as we've often been told, where certain people are kinesthetic or auditory. I forgot all the different visual learners. It is the research, even the initial research, had shown that it was more about a learning preference, and also that's about more material specific and less about the learner. So you do need a diagram if you're studying the anatomy of a frog, right? That everyone's a visual learner at that point. You also might need to dig in and look at the anatomy of the frog physically. And that is good for everyone, even though they may or may not like it. And so the frustration is that I don't think I can or should adapt to every student, because let's take this scenario. If I find out, and this is going to be kind of a comical version of this perhaps, but that I have a student who is a visual learner, and that's how they learn. So I give all of their material to them in a visual perspective, where they're seeing diagrams and pictures. How good are they going to be when they finish my class at reading or at listening, following auditory instructions or doing physical manipulatives? They're going to be bad at that because I only strengthen the muscles they already were strong in, and I just let their other muscles atrophy. Therefore, they've not become stronger; they have become weaker. And it burned the teacher out in the process. And so, what we're talking today instead is Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. And I think it's a really cool concept. It's something that I don't go through the guidelines every time I plan something, but I am regularly thinking about this as a conceptual principle more so than a checklist principle. And before I explain it, Aaron, you went to ChatGPT and got, I think, a really good way of explaining kind of the key differences between DI and UDL.
Yeah, so again, since I'm playing catch up with Desmond here and somewhat familiar, but really haven't studied these out in depth, the UDL concepts. And so I just went to ChatGPT and I said, explain to me, compare and contrast, in fact, was the prompt, DI and UDL. And it did a great job because everything I know about the two, it definitely stayed on point with it. But one of my takeaways, kind of reading the summaries, and maybe Desmond, we could share this Google Doc I dropped these notes into in the notes for this episode. So check the notes, because yeah, absolutely, you've got some more stuff coming here. But it frames in terms of approach, DI so differentiated instruction is more reactive, and UDL is more proactive. And the reason it does that, when you kind of dig in here, I actually further prompted it, but I like what I've included in this Google Doc, so check the show notes for that. But it frames it as UDL is very kind of more loaded on the prep side. You're taking certain things into account when you're prepping for your lessons and for your instruction and the student experience, which is really what it's focused on. And differentiated instruction is more you're reacting to the student's needs very much on the fly, oftentimes. And so that's not a perfect way to explain them, and I'm not trying to do that. But in terms of the teacher's experience with the two, obviously it would be nice to be more on the intentional, pre-planned, proactive side versus reactive. And so that was one of my takeaways about them.
Well, I think that really helps to frame it well, is the proactive versus reactive. And I generally in life would like to be more proactive than reactive. And so I think that is one of the reasons why this resonates with me. To define it, I think it's good to go to the website. And we'll obviously include this in the show notes, but this is udlguidelines.cast.org. And I want to give a little disclaimer. I am not very familiar with the parent company or parent organization of CAST that developed UDL. I did some reading up on them just a little, and it seems like their main mission is until learning has no limits. And I'm just reading first on CAST's main website. At CAST, we know that barriers to learning and are in education design, not individual learners. We invented UDL to help break down these barriers so that all learners can shape their own learning journey and reach their potential. We elevate learning at every level with meticulous research and innovation, innovative professional development. And the thing I know mostly about CAST is the UDL guidelines. I'm a fan of the UDL guidelines, and I'm sure that CAST does other things, but disclaimer, I don't know what those are. And we have no affiliation with CAST, but from what I can tell, they're doing some cool stuff.
Hey, real quick, Desmond, I'll jump in here. I looked up the historical background of UDL. Oh, good.
Tell us. This is a perfect time.
So CAST actually took principles from the architecture field and arena and implemented them. That was kind of the foundational beginnings in the early 90s to start creating the foundation for UDL. They published key materials outlining UDL principles in 1998. In the early 2000s, gained wider recognition through educational conferences. So the amazing part about it is I was reading through this kind of sketch of the history of it. I remained largely unfamiliar with it throughout all of this time, and I was really coming into education in the early 2000s. So the fact that it went right by me somehow kind of worries me that I didn't pick up on this sooner. 2008, UDL was included in the Higher Education Opportunity Act. That was the first major mention in U.S. federal legislation to it. And then in 2014, UDL became part of the Every Student Succeeds Act, further embedding it into the U.S. education policy. So I just found that interesting, that it's been around for a long time, comes from the architecture field, which is neat because of one of those examples you shared with me before we jumped into this episode regarding physical design.
Yeah, and in the physical design world, I heard a little bit about this. I didn't know the direct connection. I knew they were influential towards each other. So that's cool having the direct connection. But a podcast that I've listened to for a very long time, one of the original podcasts is 99% Invisible. And quite a while ago, they did some episodes on, and I'm going to get the terms wrong, but it was, oh man, I wish I could adversarial design, I think, in architecture. And then also universal design. And I think there's another term for that this is based off of. So before the show, I talked about curb cuts with Aaron. And if you've ever walked on a sidewalk and it has this curb cut, which dips down into the road, that was implemented for handicapped people in wheelchairs. I mean, imagine going off a big curb on a wheelchair. However, everyone uses the curb cuts because it allows you to know where the proper place to walk on and off. If you're like taking, rolling something heavy onto the sidewalk, or you're just all the time, we're using and benefiting by those curb cuts. And so that's a universal benefit. And that's kind of the idea behind UDL. So as I'm reading from the description on the website, the UDL guidelines are a tool used in the implementation of universal design for learning, a framework developed by CAST to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. The goal of UDL is learning agency that is purposeful and reflective and resourceful and authentic and strategic and action oriented. So, we are a Christian podcast here. And it's not our 100% focus, but it is an underlining core value of ours. And I think that as a Christian, this is even more important because I believe that and I think not just Christians believe this, but as a Christian, I very much believe that all people are super valuable, because they're created by God. And so the cool thing is that UDL says yes, and we're going to make it so that everyone has the same kind of access, so that everyone has the same approach, which I think is really powerful.
Absolutely. And, I would also note one thing here, Desmond. Some of the things as I was kind of preparing to try to catch up to you on this one.
Sounds like you caught up fast, man.
Not at all. Still working on it. But that really these two concepts are less competing and more complementary because, UDL is very preparation centric, and it's an intentional design approach to instruction and really to making resources available, having choice within that model, et cetera, that it doesn't necessarily compete with the concepts of differentiated instruction, which are really based on specific learners' needs within the framework. So you can, say you love both, do them both, right? But UDL I feel like it takes a little bit of a step back, and it starts with a more intentional focus than this adaptive type of model that DI seems to, encourage.
And you don't have to, if you do it from the beginning, I think it allows you to be a lot more clear and ready to assist your students in the moment, because you are designing things from the beginning. There's a student who I've realized I need to differentiate one of her assignments or more of her assignments to a degree. I'll talk about it a little later. And I haven't had the time to go back and do that. But if I had designed it from the beginning, it would have worked a lot better. So my plan now is to redesign that assignment and get feedback from her. And then that's going to be the assignment. And that's kind of the UDL approach. It's not going to be just for her. In the future, all students are going to get that version of the assignment. And it's going to work better for all of them.
Something that just popped into my mind right there, this is a great way to kind of distinguish the two. So again, the guy catching up, correct me if I'm wrong here, Desmond, but I think this is a good way to frame the differences in the two. So UDL, let's actually start with differentiated instruction. In your example right there, so let's say you have a student who's a struggling reader, and you've provided no assistive technologies to the students, and they're taking a test. Student walks back to the teacher's desk. One of those opportunities the student has is to have the questions read to them if needed, and so the teacher kind of quietly reads the question. Okay, I get it. They go back to their seat. So this would probably be a good example of differentiation, right? You're allowing students to receive assistance in a varied type of model versus, and that's maybe not the strongest example of DI, but at a very kind of basic level. And then UDL would provide the assistive technology where any student could utilize having the question read to them, so it's accessible to everybody, right? So, but the latter, the UDL example, takes more preparation to ensure that all of the students have access to having the question read on demand as needed, not in a one-off model by the teacher. So I don't know if that's the strongest example, but as you were talking, I thought, man, that's a good way to kind of differentiate these two.
That is good. And I'll give a reinforcement example in just a moment. But I do realize I meant to give a disclaimer earlier. we're probably getting a bunch of stuff wrong here. And this is where we need our community. And so from the DI side, I know there's a bunch of different versions of DI. So there are versions and trainings I've been in DI that were very good and very strong. And we're quite frankly probably more close to the UDL side. And we probably don't have everything right with UDL, especially when we go into our unpack the tech section. Well, as we try to interpret some of the parts of the UDL framework, we might get some of those interpretations wrong. So please, we are wanting this to be a community involvement, and we would love to have your interaction in the comments and other places. But I do want to give another example of a student I had in my classroom a good while ago, who she was severely low visioned. She could see, but not very well. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before. And she, was smart. She was, ready to learn, but her vision really, set her or made it challenging for her to do certain things. And in the previous situation, this is back when not every school had one-to-one devices. And so in the public school she had come from, at that school, she had received a lot of assistance. She had a designated, person who provided all the resources for her. But those resources were done in a DI way that she did not appreciate. They were done, you might have seen it, where she had larger printouts of the pages that she could have on her desk. You could have these big magnifier things and these, special devices. And so when she was in the classroom, she felt very different. and her mom had told me that and I think this is one of the reasons why they pulled her out of that situation and brought her to our school, is that she felt very out of place every time. Therefore, she didn't use those things. She needed them. They were provided to her. But because as a middle schooler, she felt so different. Every middle schooler feels that way, but she had these examples on her desk. She refused to use them. And so she struggled really significantly. When she came to our school, we had laptops, and we didn't even need to have that much special. I don't think we had any special software. We would have if she needed it, but we didn't. She didn't need it. But she could pinch and zoom, make things bigger. She could use, text to speech, but mostly she would make things bigger on her screen and then sit really close to her screen. And I regularly checked in on her, kept tabs with her, talked to her person at the public school system that provided good support. And that was awesome because she didn't have to feel as different. She had the same resources everyone else in the classroom had. Everyone else could do that, but she really needed specific ways of using it. And that's what I think is really cool about UDL, is that it gives everyone the access.
Man, as you're talking about that, so my world as an administrator has been largely focused in the junior high realm. And that's kind of, when kids get more self-conscious, they're trying to figure out who they are. And I've had that same experience with kids when it comes to standardized testing. So backing up to where we had paper-based standardized testing, fast forwarding to now where we do everything, with devices, probably most schools do. Our school system uses the NWEA MAP growth testing. And one of the things I've really appreciated is the integrated assistive technologies within the MAP platform. For that exact reason, I would have students who had accommodations, for the extra time or the one-on-one administration, who between them and their parents would decide, I feel too different when I'm getting pulled out. I'd rather just give it my best shot in the classroom without having any accommodations. But yet they needed them. And so ultimately, it's their choice. We're not going to force it if the student and parent agree. Now, fast forwarding to where we don't have to worry about that because it's integrated in the platform. So really similar to your experience there, when those resources are made available, wow, it's just a big win for the kids. So, hey, Desmond, I think it's time, man.
I think so.
Let's unpack the tech.
Let's go. All right, so today for unpacking the tech, we are going to use an example. So we're going to be referring to the UDL guidelines, and these will be linked in the podcast. I'll be reading parts of them out loud. It's going to be a little weird to read every word on here. I encourage you, if you're not at a spot right now, you can Google later UDL guidelines, and you will find them very easily. And we will have them on the screen from time to time. But my plan is to take a worksheet, which I will also link in the description. And I have to admit, we every so often do stuff with AI, and I have to confess where I did this. But my plan was to find a worksheet and kind of rip it apart and apply UDL principles to it. But I always feel guilty. Also, I'm not always sure if we have permission to do that or not. And I always feel guilty tearing apart someone's beautiful work. And so I didn't want to do that. And so instead, I went on to Gemini 2.5, which is really good. Aaron just told me you're trying the paid version of ChatGPT, right?
That's where I'm at right now, giving it a spin.
And so I've been using the Gemini 2.5, which is actually free. And so I had it make a worksheet, and I'll just explain the worksheet, but you can, and I will also, let me share my screen so you can follow along. It'll be in the notes. And it starts off very as expected with just a vocabulary matching, word to definition. And then it comes down to label this chart. And I have to admit, the Gemini won't generate images, but it described an image. And so when it described the image, when it described the image, I took that image description into ImageFX, which is Google's image sharing or image creation tool. And I put that description in there, and it gave me this picture. It actually gave me 4 beautiful pictures. And then we have at the end to think about a little place to write what is the main source of energy that powers the water cycle and how does it power it. And then another with a longer place to write, explain the difference between evaporation and transpiration. And we had to look up what those are. Evaporation we knew is water, evaporating from water or steam. And transpiration, Aaron, hit us.
Oh, what is so
it's
that
okay
would be
I put you on the spot.
The loss of water vapor through the pores of plants. I think is what we found out, right?
That's cool.
Yeah. So and it makes sense because, well, you could use plants or people when you're transpiring. Let's think of sweating and then the loss of water through the emission of small water particles. So
that's cool. And I picked this topic because my 6th grade son has been studying this right now.
I was going to ask you because I was like, man, that's like a lot of lines for a 6th grader to write on question number 2 there. That
I even removed some.
Like
so that's what.
lines.
So I'll show you a Gemini. Hold on, I'm not there yet. I was pulling up some other stuff I worked on, so don't show that. Where's a water cycle? Right here. Here is what it looked like in Gemini. I just gave it the prompt, create a worksheet about water cycle for 6th graders. I know this is not the topic of our video. It brought me this, but then I exported it to docs and it formatted it nicely and everything. It was a really awesome experience. And then here's my ImageFX pictures that it generated. I think all of them are quite good. I just chose that one randomly. So we have this worksheet. And so as we work through this worksheet, my idea is to look at these UDL guidelines and kind of talk through them and figure out how to apply them. So, and we're going to use technology in as many places as we can on here. And so we're kind of doing some of this live and some of it I've planned out. So Aaron, let's throw back and forth on this. But the first UDL principle we're going to talk about, and I'm going to start. I'm holding up the paper, but Katrina, our editor, will put it up on the screen. Ask you now, please. She does an awesome job at that. I feel confident. And our first one is we're going to start on the top left, and we're going to work our way across one line at a time, one row at a time. And so our first one, well, actually, I'm going to explain the chart. Each row across is a different section. So the first row has to do with access, the top row. The second to top starts with support. And then the bottom row is effective function. And then we go down in our columns. Our first column is design multiple means of engagement. And I think the idea is that this hits different parts of the brain. And then the next middle column is design multiple means of um, representation. I shouldn't read sideways. Representation. And then the last column is design multiple means of action and expression. So the first one is with this idea, the water cycle in this worksheet that is very basic, not always accessible for everyone. Welcome interests and identities, and one of the things on here is optimizing choice and autonomy. So my first thought is let's give the students multiple ways they can do this. And so you can, and this is another way where you can use AI to say, like, what are some other, give some other options for this. I was thinking of allowing my students to do it, like on a presentation, or to do it on paper, or to record a video of them pointing to it. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, you've got writers out there, people that love to write. You could say, write a short story that incorporates these concepts and must include these words. So instead of defining the words or matching them, they're having to, number one, make sure they know what they are, but then they're even taking it to the next level and incorporating that into written thought. So short stories. Did you just mention like shoot a short video maybe where they're acting things out? A lot of different modalities there. Yeah.
And the key with this is the reason why it's UDL is that everyone has the opportunity to choose. And so to make that powerful, and this is kind of a DI thing I've heard, is that you have clear standards at the beginning. This is what you are demonstrating. Like, I'm expecting to see these things demonstrated. And instead of just doing the worksheet, or maybe a worksheet is an option, they also have these other ways of displaying it.
We're not going to get into this. We love to get sidetracked, okay? But I'm going to throw out something we could get sidetracked on, but we're going to really not, okay? But I'm thinking so many teachers that, like myself, I grew up in a very, more static learning environment. It's a lot of worksheets. It's a lot of, do numbers 1 through 12 on your math assignment, and then, 14 and 18 word problems, and like just very kind of straightforward approach to question and answer. And then everything is graded, and, the grade from that assignment goes into the grade book. And so it's a very just straightforward, really everything's an assessment in that regard, So part of the struggle here people might have, so I want to just mention it, is the concept of assessment with something like this. If you're used to just giving out lots of worksheets, then you're probably sitting there thinking, well, how do I give a grade for that? If I can't like mark certain things wrong and then other things are right and they got an 83% on that, how do I assess that? Well, there's a lot of great research. I think we're way past the worksheet generation of like everything's got to be assessed and scored and graded and goes in the grade book all the same. And so we're not really tackling assessment or how grades are contrived today, but I do think you need to allow yourself to be freed from a traditional model when it comes to how grades are constituted in order to think this way, right? And really, we're thinking in ways that allow for students to really thrive. So you're valuing. We're in step 1, really. Okay, we're in this green section, but nurturing joy and play. That's what stood out to me, Desmond, in this. So think about this: straight up worksheet, wrote just same every time, versus like, okay, now there's some variety here. Yeah, it's harder to assess that. It's harder to grade that. So as a teacher, you're going to have to move past that and say, well, okay, my grades are going to have to be a little looser. Maybe we're giving more participation-based stuff, but as long as they're participating in the learning experience and demonstrating their ability to complete the objectives, then why isn't something closer to full credit? Because you don't want to also get in the game of having to make a rubric for every single potential activity a student can choose between, because now you're in this world of like tons of work falling back on you as a teacher. So I'll stop here, but again, just saying you need to liberate yourself a little bit from a traditional way of instruction and assessment which is like this daily rut so many teachers, just kind of get stuck in. So
Now, I want to not counter that completely, but push back on it just slightly. In the, take this one step at a time, right? So, and it might be that take the approach and apply UDL and get rid of worksheet on one or two assignments or activities. Or it might also be that you start to adjust your UDL or, adjust a worksheet so that it incorporates more UDL stuff to it. So it's still kind of like a worksheet, but it has more choice to it. It has more, different modalities of learning and activities. And that takes us to the second one, actually, I think will help reinforce this. Is that the next one is perception and support opportunities to customize the display of information. And I think of this as like, some kids want a physical book. Some kids want a digital version, auditory. I like it on the UDL website. If you highlight anything, it brings up a little play button. If you want to see good examples of a well UDL designed website, go to their page because it's just chock full of things. And so it might be also, I know we've talked about Notebook LM before, but you can, put like a chapter from your book in there and have it generate a podcast. So it can deliver the information in a different form. And so having multiple versions of something is really cool. So maybe you have the lecture, but then you also have a YouTube video or something that goes along with it that reinforces learning in a different way. And so that's perception. That's the second one. Interaction, which one of the points is vary and honor the methods for response and navigation and movement. Optimize access and accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools. So having that text to speech button everywhere you can is important. Now, this has become so much easier, and text to speech is one of the things. It's not the only thing. Sometimes you need speech to text, or the opposite. But in my I'm going to call them out. Teach TCI is the textbook I use for geography, and they've improved it this year too. So I'm calling them out positive. Is that they have added, or they have a play button at the top. And then you can change the speed and stuff. So in the digital textbook, there's a play button on every page. And it's really cool. But also Chrome, and I think a lot of other browsers, has text-to-speech built into it now. So you can highlight or say, play me this whole page. I do that regularly when I you ever have a moment where you see an article you want to read, but you can't sit down and read it at that moment. So I'll pop my headphones in and I will ask Chrome to read it to me. And so, we do these things in our own lives all the time. We're looking for ways to adapt it so we can learn or we can get through things. And so it's cool I think it's important to provide those tools for our students.
Another good example of that, Desmond, is you said, text to speech, but speech to text, dictation. A lot of great writers out there that pen to paper, not great writers, typing slow, but they can construct the ideas in their mind. And when they're dictating, they sound like a whole different writer than when they're writing. And so baking in just dictation as well. It's too easy for students to access that now to not provide it.
Yeah. Man, I find my students doing it all the time. I mean, I do it a lot too, but I did have to stop a student who was doing it during a test the other day.
Yeah. That's totally appropriate.
Speaking his answers right out loud.
Oh, man.
So,
fun times.
Yeah. Do you mind talking through the next row? That way,
well, I'll do my best here. I feel ill-equipped because I didn't study this as in depth as you did. I printed
That's okay.
it.
Just read the titles, and I'll help.
All right. Yeah. So we're on the green column, the engagement piece for support. So sustaining effort and persistence. Is this where we're at?
Yeah.
Is where you want me to be? Okay. Sustaining effort and persistence. So clarifying the meaning and purpose of goals, optimizing challenges and support, fostering collaboration, belonging and community, and offering action-oriented feedback.
So the thing that struck me with that was the fostering collaboration, and independence, and collective learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Hmm.
like those, all three are important there, right? You want your students to be able to learn as a group and as individuals, and as a whole big group collectively. And so this can have take all sorts of forms. It might be I've not done this, but I've heard of teachers do this where they basically have their students not on Wikipedia, but you can have them basically create a wiki or combined collaborative notes where they're editing and making the notes all together. And I've also seen it where, or another way of I think applying this, and again, if we're misapplying these, please correct us in the chat, and we'll have to do a follow up episode if we learn a lot after
I'm
this.
positive that I am misapplying multiple things here today.
You're good.
Okay.
So, but I think it's important to have them do both group and independent learning, and I would say that I think it's important to. I try to in my classes, and I think this is a proper application of this, but provide opportunities where they have to do it in a small group. I push them because I still want to push them. Okay. And I will be reflective to my students who, struggle a little more with that, but I want them to learn that skill. Uh, and then there'll be times where they have to do it independently, and then there's other times where they can choose to do it with a partner or a small group or independently. And I try to give them kind of a mix, and it kind of depends on the assignment, kind of depends on the mood of the room, it kind of depends on how much time we have. It depends on a lot of things. But I try to keep, and also like if we've been doing a lot of independent work, I try to then give them a group, to mix it up and vice versa. And that's I think a proper application of that.
So you could look at this and say, man, how do you work in these principles into like a math class? And I'm sitting here evaluating it that way because I'm a math teacher in my heart by trade. And, I'm thinking, and I'm peeking ahead as well to the purple side, okay,
Yeah.
for language and symbols.
I keep on
And I'm
forgetting our
just,
worksheet.
yeah, so language and symbols. And I'm thinking, to your point, individually, I want to know students understand a concept. Okay, so you guys have probably, if you haven't seen the IXL episode, go back, take a peek at that, see, foundationally why I love it. And that is the group jam feature. You can see every student, every question you're pushing out. So you know who gets it, who doesn't. When they've demonstrated ability to complete things individually, then they're allowed to work together in small groups. And so then you're kind of varying that model within one class period. But something else I'll mention on the math side, this is important here, language and symbols, clarifying what you mean. Okay, so something that one of our high school teachers here does a great job of, shout out Mr. Nelson, he's always driving the fact that students' understanding of math vocabulary is way too low, and how much we need to incorporate into every class math vocabulary. And so as simple as, hold up your hands to demonstrate about how long a foot is. Okay, so he's commented to me multiple times that he gets all kinds of stuff, and just like foundationally, when we say a foot, we assume students get that, but testing that on the fly, building that into part of what you do as a teacher. So apply that to your area of expertise. If you're elementary, you're experts in everything, right? But I just like that picture I'm seeing created here in the support line, and that is individual, group, collective learning. All of that is awesome, and you can do it all in every subject. This doesn't have to be isolated to social studies where you're doing projects or science. It can apply to things like math too. Same with language and symbols. So really good stuff.
Yeah, so let's jump on to language and symbols. I'm looking at our time, so we do need to speed it up, as though I have more things to say about group. Language and symbols. So clarifying vocabulary and symbols and language. And the symbols is, could be, there's arrows, or like I have this graph on here on the worksheet that has, little lines coming out of white puffy things. I assume my students are going to know that's clouds that are raining, but I might need to define that and explain the graph to them before I just hand it to them. As a geography teacher, helping my students understand graphs and maps is one of my most important things I do. And my tests have become mostly that. And so preparing them for those and then assessing that has been really important. But then also making sure you define everything and you have clear access to those definitions, not assuming they know them. And then another thing, I've been using Magic School. And in Magic School, there's all these tools you can roll out to your students. So right now I'm teaching my 7th and 8th grades about HTML and CSS. And they're working at code.org, tool we featured, awesome tool. And they're working on their assignments or projects. I'm floating around the room helping them. But then I also, since I'm one person in a big classroom, I gave them access to the code assistant in Magic School. So they can ask questions to that and get understanding. Now I've seen them try it. I'll be honest, Magic School, they've not given you a great review yet. So it's my first tool I've really fully rolled out into my classroom. But I think that's a great kind of way to give them access to find the answers themselves as well, but provide a good way to do it. Let's go to the next one. Using multimedia as forms of communications, using multiple tools for construction and composition and creativity, building fluency and graduated support for practice and performance, and then addressing biases related to models of expression and communication. And so for this, I think that giving instruction in multiple medias is how I understand that. So maybe you give them the textbook, maybe you give them a YouTube video, maybe you give them a podcast, maybe you give them a Wikipedia page or something else. You give them a physical version, digital version. You give them access to multiple versions of the same material. Now, I know that might be a little work to check and make sure everything's there. So maybe you give one or two, but I think it's cool. I learn very well through listening to podcasts as an adult. And I'm hoping our learners feel the same way. But that's how I've done a lot of learning, is listening to podcasts. That's good for me. I learn better that way than I do through a textbook, although I've read some good textbooks. And so providing multiple forms of media is how I understand that to be. And so for our water cycle, you might give them a YouTube animation or video that explains the water cycle. Might be even a short. Doesn't have to be very long for that.
All right, Desmond, we better jump into this last row here.
All right, last row. Let's cook, as my students say.
So let's cook. So it's for the executive function. All right. So
Yes.
This is what we're covering here. In the green column for engagement, we have emotional capacity. So recognize expectations, beliefs, and motivations. Develop awareness of self and others. Promote individual and collective reflection, and cultivate empathy and restorative practices.
So my understanding of this is something that I push a lot, especially in my Bible classes, but all my classes, is this is a great way to help your students, like teach them how to, and I maybe have less of a tool of this, but in discussions and the way you present in class is make sure you're not demeaning other people or other groups or other beliefs. And I do this very intentionally. I tell my students I do this intentionally because I want them to learn that too. That something I repeat a lot is that you can have a conversation, a respectful conversation with someone you disagree with, right? Or I will say, I'll make a statement in class and I will say, if you disagree with me, that's okay, right? Like I want them, especially if it's something that is not, the water cycle is less controversial, I think. But, something that might be a little controversial, I want them to know that I value them even if I disagree with them. And then I put that in practice when they do disagree with me. Now, I do ask them to, especially since I teach high school, to not simply disagree with me, but to tell me why. All right? I won't accept, I disagree with you because I don't like it. Why don't you like it? It might still be an emotional reason, but I want to know the reason, not just I don't like it.
Really good. We could spend some time on this one, but I think I'm going to hold my comment. We're going to keep going here. But that one probably out of all of these probably deserves the most time, and I'm a little regretful we're short on time at this point because it's so key. All right, the purple column for representation is designing options for building knowledge, and that would include connecting prior knowledge to new learning, highlight and explore patterns, critical features, big ideas, and relationships. So, putting things into context, cultivating multiple ways of knowing and making meaning, and maximize transfer and generalization.
So this one, this one is fun. I think, prior knowledge, my first thought is, oh, what's the prior lesson we did? That is prior knowledge. But what's also prior knowledge is your students' personal experiences. So and I want to encourage you, try AI with this. You could do it on the teacher side where you throw it in, take your lesson, you just copy and paste it into an AI you trust and say, tell it to me in Minecraft form, or tell it to me in some other form, or that is going to be familiar and connecting with your class. And that is their prior knowledge, right? So you're connecting it to their prior knowledge, you're framing it in a way that will relate personally to them. And I think that's pretty cool. In fact, Magic School has a specific tool, and I forget the name of it. I demoed it the other day in a webinar I did, and it was really cool. But I think it's something like "Tell it to me in another way." I should have had that ready, where you could give them that access to that tool too. So if they are really stuck on, like I have a student who is really stuck on cars, right? So he could always be pulling it up and applying it to cars. All the other students would roll their eyes at it, but he could always be having it explained to him in that format.
Love it. All right. Lastly here, action and expression. So last column, last little cube down there. Design options for strategy development, which would include set meaningful goals, anticipate and plan for challenges, organize information and resources, enhance capacity for monitoring progress, and challenge exclusionary practices. So before you kind of bring any additional context here, Desmond, this is a lot to think about, okay? So my first thought is, wow, if you're designing lessons and you're like, wow, that's a lot to keep in mind. Well, Desmond's already kind of painted a good picture here of, we're not suggesting you totally change everything about how you're designing instruction and your assignments. Dabble, right? Start to try it out. But also, I think the things that strike me about this is similar to how, a lot of the math curriculum now is paced. You're not doing one lesson per day. A lot of math curriculum now is 2 days per lesson. So you're spending a little more time on a topic. And so within that, maybe start to think of your assignments as not a daily assignment, okay? But let's look at 1 or 2 assignments this week, and we're going to go through different levels of exploration, and students are going to have choice on projects, and some will be individual time, and some will be group. And something, again, I come back to it, nurturing joy and play. Some of this is going to be just to spark interest and have fun. You can't do all this in one class period. I mean, you're not going to get through all of this context and implementation, nor should you on the regular, in my opinion. So I think, freeing yourself a little bit from, the way you've been doing things, from the way you've been thinking of grading, and then also from the pacing. The pacing really should likely change if you're fully implementing UDL concepts.
Yeah, and maybe, to add on to that as well, is that it's not just about changing your assignments, but it's also about providing the support to your students. So we talked about, text to speech. Well, make that always available, then you can check that off. Talked about Magic School has all these tools you can roll out to your students and give them the option to always frame it. And I'm thinking that I think I'm going to do that in another way that they can understand it. Give them the resources. And this last one of strategic development, like, maybe you have a framework in your classroom where you are checking in on your students at a regular pace, or you provide them a structure to be able to track where they're at. Having them track. Some of our elementary teachers do really awesome tracking. My son's teacher does a really awesome tracking, and they can see their progress and they can see where they're at. And that just really helps them frame it. So that would be the strategy and development. Thank you for joining us today on our journey into EdTech Unpacked, where we talked about how you should stop differentiating your instruction and start designing it with intention from the beginning for all of your learners with universal design for learning and guidelines. And I hope that they were impactful to you. We would love for you to send your EdTech problems to be solved for us to help you. And along with any other feedback, you can find that on our website at edtechunpacked.com, where you can submit an audio recording and also our contact form. And don't forget to follow EdTech Unpacked on Blue Sky and X.com.
So we've covered a lot today, and that can start to feel overwhelming, very much how Desmond and I felt sitting in seminars in our younger years, learning about instructional design, and in particular, differentiated instruction. And we understand that can be a little bit stressful at times, but we just want you to remember, God has a great purpose and place for you in His plan, and we are stronger as we journey together, striving to give our best for the calling of His Spirit. May we always lend a listening ear to our students. May our attempts to engage students through technology never interfere with our calling to minister to the heart and soul of students in need. And remember, there is no substitute for great teaching. It's not about the tools and technology you use, but how you foster meaningful relationships with your students to transform their lives. We'll see you next time.